You're sitting at the kitchen table with a repair estimate in your hand for $1,200 to replace the HVAC system. It's 92 degrees outside, and you're trying to calculate whether this wipes out your cushion for the year. That feeling in your stomach, that's what we're going to fix today. Most financial advice about emergency funds treats everyone the same. 3 to 6 months of expenses, they say. Set it aside and forget about it. But here's what I found surprising after 2 decades in institutional finance. Retirement changes everything about how emergency cash works. The rules you followed during your working years don't apply anymore. And the difference matters more than most advisors admit. My name is David Harrington. I spent over 2 decades as an investment banking analyst and portfolio strategist, navigating market cycles, recessions, and financial bubbles. After stepping away from institutional finance, I now focus on helping everyday people, especially those approaching or enjoying retirement, understand money in a calm, practical way. Before we continue, a quick note. This isn't financial advice. Everyone's situation is different. Think of this as education to help you ask better questions and make calmer decisions. By the end of this video, you'll have a simple way to think about how much cash actually creates peace of mind in retirement without sabotaging your long-term plan. You'll understand why the old rules don't work anymore and what number makes sense for your specific situation. If this kind of practical retirement planning resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It helps more people find this information when they need it. And click the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Now let's dive in. Think about what an emergency fund does when you're working. You lose your job, the furnace dies, the car needs transmission work. You pull from your emergency cash and then you rebuild it. Next paycheck, the paycheck after that, you fill it back up over a few months. The fund works because it's temporary. You spend it, you replenish it. Simple. Now think about retirement. There's no next paycheck. There's no automatic replenishment. When you pull $4,200 out of your emergency fund to fix that HVAC system, where does that money come from when you need to rebuild the fund? Your Social Security? That's already covering your monthly bills. Your investment account? Now you're selling stocks or bonds, maybe at exactly the wrong time, just to restore your cash cushion. This is the part most retirement planning overlooks. Emergency funds and retirement aren't just different in degree, they're different in kind. The money you set aside for emergencies needs to work harder because you can't simply rebuild it from earned income anymore. Let me share what I learned watching portfolios during the 2008 crisis. The retirees who stayed calm weren't the ones with the highest returns or the most aggressive growth strategies. They were the ones who had enough cash that they never had to sell stocks when the market was down 30%. They could wait. They had breathing room. They made decisions based on what made sense, not based on desperation. That breathing room. That's what we're really talking about when we discuss emergency funds and retirement. It's not just about covering emergencies. It's about maintaining your independence to make calm decisions regardless of what's happening in the markets, the economy, or your immediate circumstances. Here's what this means for your daily life. When you have truly adequate cash reserves in retirement, something shifts psychologically. You stop checking your investment account balance every time you need to make a decision. You stop calculating whether you can afford to help your grandchildren with college. You stop lying awake wondering what happens if both the roof and the car go bad in the same year. You might be wondering how much is enough. The working years formula, 3 to 6 months of expenses, that's where most people start. And it's not wrong exactly. It's just incomplete for retirement. Let me show you why. During your working years, 3 months of expenses might be $15,000. That covers you while you find a new job, handle a medical issue, deal with whatever comes up. In retirement, 3 months of expenses might be the same $15,000. But here's what's different. You're not covering yourself for 3 months while something resolves. You're covering yourself for however long it takes the stock market to recover from a downturn, or until your required minimum distribution timing improves, or until healthcare costs stabilize after a medical event. 3 months of expenses doesn't create breathing room in retirement. It creates barely enough space to handle one significant problem. And retirement, if we're being honest, usually involves more than one problem at a time. Here's what actually happens. You're 72 years old. The market drops 20%. Your advisor says, "Don't worry, stay invested. This is temporary." You know he's probably right. But you also know you need to take your required minimum distribution this year. and that distribution just got a lot more expensive in terms of shares you have to sell. Meanwhile, your property taxes went up, your Medicare supplement premium increased again, and your dentist says you need a crown that insurance won't cover. If you only have 3 months of expenses in cash, every one of these situations feels like a crisis. You're forced to make decisions based on immediate pressure rather than long-term sense. You might sell investments you wanted to hold. You might delay medical care you actually need. You might stress about things that should be manageable annoyances, not threats to your security. Now imagine the same scenario with 18 months of expenses in cash, about $50,000 for most retirees. The market drops 20%. Okay, that's not pleasant, but you're not selling anything this year. You can wait for recovery. The property taxes, the Medicare premium, the dental work. You handle them from your cash cushion without even thinking about your investment account. Your required minimum distribution can wait until next year or the year after when the market has recovered. Same external circumstances, completely different internal experience. That's what adequate cash reserves create in retirement. Let me put this simply. The question isn't whether you can cover 3 months of expenses. The question is whether you can avoid making forced financial decisions during the worst possible times. And in retirement, the worst possible times can last a lot longer than 3 months. Think about it this way. The 2008 financial crisis took about 5 years for most portfolios to fully recover. If you retired in 2007 with 6 months of cash and started taking withdrawals in 2008, you were selling stocks at terrible prices for years. But if you retired in 2007 with 2 years of cash, you didn't touch your stock portfolio until 2010 or 2011 when things had substantially recovered. Same retirement date, same market crash, completely different outcome. The only difference was cash. This connects to something even more important, your daily peace of mind. After 2 decades in finance, I can tell you that the math of retirement planning is actually pretty straightforward. But the psychology, that's where people struggle. And cash reserves are one of the most powerful psychological tools you have. When you have 18 to 36 months of expenses in cash, you sleep differently. You make decisions differently. You interact with your financial advisor differently. You're not calling in a panic when the market drops. You're not stressed about every unexpected bill. You have what institutional investors call optionality, the freedom to choose your timing rather than having timing forced on you. Here's the reality that financial media doesn't emphasize. Cash loses buying power to inflation over time. That's true. A dollar today won't buy as much in 10 years. Also true. But you know what's more expensive than inflation? Selling your stock portfolio at a 30% loss because you needed cash and had no other option. That's not inflation eating away at your purchasing power over decades. That's a permanent destruction of wealth happening in a single transaction. Let me give you a real example. 2 retirees, both 68 years old, both with $800,000 in investments. One keeps $10,000 in cash, about 3 months of expenses. The other keeps $50,000 in cash, about 18 months of expenses. The market drops 25%. The first retiree needs $40,000 for living expenses over the next year. She has to sell shares when they're down 25%. She sells what would have been $30,000 worth of stock in a normal market, but now it takes $40,000 worth because prices are down. When the market recovers, she's missed out on gains on that extra stock she had to sell. The second retiree uses her cash cushion for that entire year, doesn't touch her investment account. When the market recovers 12 months later, her full portfolio participates in the recovery. She preserved wealth by having cash available exactly when she needed it most. The difference isn't small. Over a full retirement, being forced to sell during downturns can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Having adequate cash reserves isn't about earning returns on that cash. It's about protecting everything else from terrible timing. You might be thinking this sounds conservative, maybe even too conservative. Here's what I learned in institutional finance. Wall Street makes money when you're active, when you're trading, when you're moving money around. They don't make money when you're sitting calmly with adequate reserves, making patient decisions. So the advice you get from the financial industry often pushes you toward being more aggressive, taking more risk, keeping less cash. But here's what institutions actually do with their own money. They maintain substantial liquid reserves. They plan for scenarios. They avoid forced decisions. They optimize for the long term, not the short term. What they do for themselves looks very different from what they often recommend to retirees. Now here's where it gets interesting. The amount of cash you need isn't just about math. It's about your specific situation and your specific psychology. Some people sleep fine with 12 months of expenses in cash. Other people need 36 months before they feel genuinely calm. Both are valid. The goal isn't to match some theoretical ideal. The goal is to create actual peace of mind for you. Let me show you what this means. If you have a pension that covers most of your basic expenses, you might need less cash reserves because your income floor is higher. If you're entirely dependent on investment withdrawals and Social Security, you probably need more cash because your vulnerability to market timing is greater. If you have significant home equity you could access in a true emergency, that changes your calculation. If you have long-term care insurance, that removes one major potential cash need. If you have adult children who are financially stable and would help in a crisis, that's different from being entirely on your own. Every situation has nuances. But here's the baseline I saw work over and over again in my years helping retirees. 18 months of expenses in cash is where most people start to breathe easier. 36 months is where almost everyone feels genuinely secure. Less than 12 months, and you're constantly aware of your vulnerability. More than 48 months, and you're probably giving up more growth than makes sense. For most retirees, that means somewhere between $50,000 and $150,000 in cash or cash equivalents. Money market funds, high-yield savings accounts, short-term CDs, treasury bills. Not investments, not stocks or bonds that fluctuate. Actual cash you can access within a few days without selling anything at a loss. Think about what that amount of cash allows. You can handle multiple emergencies in the same year without stress. You can wait out a market downturn for several years if necessary. You can make healthcare decisions based on what you need, not what you can afford this month. You can help family members without jeopardizing your own security. You can take advantage of opportunities when they appear rather than always being in defensive mode. This is what financial security in retirement actually looks like. Not maximum returns, not aggressive growth, not beating some benchmark, just calm, sustainable stability that lets you enjoy the retirement you worked decades to reach. Here's what I found surprising when I left institutional finance. The retirees who were happiest weren't the ones with the most money. They were the ones who had enough money structured in a way that created peace of mind. And adequate cash reserves were almost always part of that structure. Not the whole strategy, but a foundational piece that made everything else work better. Let's look at this calmly and practically. You can't control the stock market. You can't control inflation. You can't control healthcare costs or tax policy or whether your house needs a new roof next year. But you can control how much cash you keep available. And that control, that optionality, that's one of the most valuable things you can create for yourself in retirement. Your future self, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, isn't going to regret having adequate cash reserves. They might regret not having enough. They might regret being forced to sell investments at the wrong time. They might regret the stress and anxiety of constantly wondering if the next problem will break them financially. But they won't regret the peace of mind that came from having breathing room. Here's the practical next step. Look at your current cash reserves. Calculate how many months of actual expenses they cover. Not theoretical expenses, but what you really spend including property taxes, insurance, healthcare, everything. If it's less than 12 months, you're in vulnerable territory. If it's less than 6 months, you're one serious problem away from forced decisions you'll regret. Then look at your total financial picture. If you have investment accounts with gains you haven't taken, this might be a good time to harvest some of those gains tax efficiently and build your cash cushion. If you're getting ready to retire and you have several years of strong market returns, lock some of that in as cash reserves before you start depending on withdrawals. This isn't about timing the market. This isn't about predicting crashes. This is about creating a buffer between you and whatever comes next. Because something always comes next. That's not pessimism. That's just reality. The question is whether you're going to face that reality from a position of strength or a position of stress. What sounds good on paper? Keeping every dollar invested for maximum growth. That's not what works in real life for most retirees. What works is having enough cash that you never have to make a financial decision out of desperation. Enough cash that market volatility is something you observe rather than something you suffer through. Enough cash that you can be patient, strategic, and calm. In my years as a portfolio strategist, I watched thousands of retirements unfold. The pattern was clear. Adequate cash reserves weren't about earning returns. They were about buying freedom. Freedom from forced timing. Freedom from panic decisions. Freedom from constant financial anxiety. And in retirement, that freedom is worth more than a few percentage points of additional return. Your situation is unique. Your comfort level is unique. Your risk tolerance, your income sources, your expenses, your family situation, all of it factors in. But the principle holds. In retirement, cash reserves aren't dead money sitting idle. They're the foundation of your financial peace of mind. They're what allows everything else in your plan to actually work. Start today, not tomorrow, not next month, not when the market does whatever you think it's going to do. Today, look at your cash position. Be honest about whether it creates genuine breathing room or whether you're one problem away from stress. Then make a plan to get to that 18 to 36-month range over the next year or two. Your future self is counting on you. The 75-year-old version of you, dealing with whatever life brings, deserves to have this foundation in place. They deserve the freedom to make good decisions instead of desperate ones. They deserve to sleep well at night. And building adequate cash reserves now is how you give them that gift. You've worked too hard and too long to spend your retirement worried about whether you can handle the next emergency. Create the cushion. Build the breathing room. Give yourself the peace of mind you've earned. That's what emergency funds in retirement are really about.